Hi everyone, so these are going to be our notes on physical and chemical changes. So make sure in your notes you write this at the top so you know what section you're writing about. So I want you guys to think back. We had this as one of our vocab words in the past. What are characteristics that we use to describe a substance? So pause the video right now, write that down in your notes. So the correct answer is properties. So properties is another word for characteristics used to describe a substance. We're going to talk about these today. So the first type of property is a physical property. So these, you can determine them without changing how something is made or what it is made of. So some examples would be color, density, odor. So if I said the color of my shirt today is green, that is a physical property of my shirt. If I said the density of water is 1 gram per milliliter, that is a property that doesn't change what it's made of and is a physical property of that substance. Also, if I said sulfur smells like rotten eggs, that is something that I can describe that is not changing what it's made of and is a physical property. It also doesn't affect a substance's ability to undergo physical changes. That means that descriptive property, so the color of something, doesn't affect whether or not it undergoes change. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a physical change? So physical changes are when your material stays the same, but the form that it's in is different. So some examples of that are melting, boiling, bending, and breaking. Those are all physical changes. So if I melt ice, frozen water, to a liquid, it's still made of water. So that is a physical change. You could freeze it and turn it back, and it's still the same material. I could also break a stick, and it is still made out of wood. I could rip a piece of paper, and it's still made out of paper, or I could bend metal, and it's still made out of metal. Chemical properties, on the other hand, are when they relate to any kind of chemical change. So if something is able to rust, or if it's able to burn, if it's able to react with something else, that is a chemical property. So if I said that oxygen facilitates burning because you need oxygen for a fire, then that's a chemical property of oxygen. And another word for burning is combustion, but they're synonymous, so we could use one for the other. So for chemical changes, it's when you have one substance that turns into new substances. It could be one, it could be multiple. So some indications of a chemical change are when you have a gas or a solid form. So that could be the formation of oxygen gas or carbon dioxide gas bubbles. It could also be the formation of some type of precipitate. That's another word for a solid. A permanent color change. So for example, if I were to burn something, let's say I burned a piece of paper, it would turn from a white color to being a dark brown, black, gray color, and I can't undo it. And a temperature change. So if I mix 2 room temperature liquids and they become freezing cold all of a sudden and I didn't put them in a freezer or anything, that is an indication of a chemical change. So when we have a chemical change, that's the same thing as having a chemical reaction. So it's when you have one or more substances that are turned into one or more different substances. So you have a reactant, which is what is present at the beginning of the reaction, and then you have a product, which is formed or produced during the reaction. So just an example here is the reaction that creates water. So if you start with hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, and they combine together, you obtain liquid water as your product. So if I have these statements, copper compounds are often blue in color. Would this describe a physical or a chemical property? Let me know what you think. So this would actually describe a physical property because it's just talking about the color of something. And then oxygen gas supports the burning of wood. Is this physical or chemical? So this would be a chemical property because we are saying that it supports a type of reaction that's happening. So now I want us to classify each of the following. So metals have a high luster, so that means they're shiny and reflective. Then the surfaces of some metals become dull when they're exposed to air. and nitrogen gas can form nitrogen oxides at high temperatures. So for each of these examples, I want you to write if it's a chemical property or a physical property. So for this first one, we said they're shiny. That is a physical property because it's talking about their appearance. Metals becoming dull when they're exposed to air is a chemical property. That's like when metals rust. And then nitrogen being able to form a new compound is also chemical because it's talking about it undergoing a chemical reaction. Now more examples. Milk turning sour if it is left out too long. Diamonds are hard enough to be used as coatings. And metals being ductile, so meaning that they can be turned into a wire. They can be bent and drawn into wire. So pause now and write down what you think, chemical or physical. So the first one is chemical, milk turning sour. You can't undo that. The second one is physical because diamonds are hard is a physical attribute of them. And then metals being ductile is also physical because you can bend and change their shape. Now we have 3 more examples. These are our last 3. Leavened bread dough, so that means dough with yeast, increases in volume if you let it rise. Unreactive argon gas, used to fill light bulbs because it prevents the filament from rusting or oxidizing. And then lastly, metals are good conductors of heat and electricity more than nonmetals. So leavened bread dough is a chemical change. So if it's rising, that's it producing a gas. So it produces carbon dioxide, which lets the dough puff up. Then unreactive argon gas is also chemical. A hint is that if it talks about reactivity at all, that relates to chemical reactions, which would make it a chemical change or a chemical property. And then lastly, metals being good conductors is a physical property of the metals. So hopefully these examples helped, and we are going to go through a lot more of these in our following videos and in class together.